It'll take a moment or two for everyone to get mic'd up. So I'll introduce myself first. I'm the editor at DCD. I edit our website and our magazine. I'll show you this copy. This is the latest issue. We got together a massive amount of content relating to energy and power and efficiency so we could bring them here. And we did. And they all disappeared. So the title is Power Sharing. And I'm going to have to share this one issue. Although, of course, you can subscribe and you will get a copy. And it's available online. And I hope you subscribe. And also, given the people I'm talking to, contribute. If there are things we need to know more about, and you know them, I'd like you to tell them to us. That's been one of the excellent features of our conferences, and particularly these Energy Smart events. Now, before I introduce the panel, we're all here, aren't we? Good.
I think so.
Looks like.
Good.
Thank you. Lacking some women.
Before I do that, I've told you who I am. I would like to have a little bit of an idea of who you are. So if you don't mind putting your hands up, that's a level of interaction that I can hopefully get from you. I want to know where you're from. Who's from Sweden? Quite a few. But who's from the rest of Europe? Or who's from Europe, shall we say, including Britain? Good. Okay, that's quite a few. Who is from the rest of the world? Okay, so a few, a bit less. So there's going to be a slightly European-tinged flavour to this, but there are quite a few people who will be looking for information to take away. One of the things I've been thinking is that we might be arriving here and hearing how great things are in Sweden and thinking, oh, okay, what do I do back home? So hopefully that's something that we'll be able to address briefly here and through the rest of the day. And the other thing I want to know is who here is not from the data center industry directly? Who is from the power grid and other infrastructure companies? Excellent, good. Okay, there are plenty of you tucked away within the data center industry. Data centers, they're our home turf, but with this series of events, we've been bringing you together with the grid people, and there's always a lot of learning that goes on. Okay, so let's introduce our panelists. We have Anders Egelrud from Exergi that you've heard of from before. Gisle from DigiPlex and Tor from Green Mountain. So that's a fairly Scandinavian-heavy panel. But Fabien from Google will be giving us a bit more of a international perspective. And we will be getting back on track. So we're aiming to finish this at 10:40. So that gives us 3/4 of an hour. Now, and I guess the kind of subjects we'll be looking at are renewables, heat reuse, other aspects of efficiency, the importance of data center location, government support, any other issues that you think ought to be covered in this panel. And feel free, if you're talking later in the day, to plug that session or any other good sessions you know about. So, okay. Shall we start from this end? If you say who you are and a few words.
Sure. Gisle Eckhoff. I'm the CEO of DigiPlex. I can see a lot of familiar faces here, which is very good. So I'm heading up the leading data center operator in the Nordic region, dominant player in Norway, full speed here into the Swedish market, and looking very carefully now into Denmark and Finland. But Nordic region is our market.
Okay. And next?
Thank you, Peter. Anders Egelrud, CEO for Stockholm Exergi. We are the largest supplier of district heating, district cooling, and also electricity in the Stockholm region. And we are actually quite proud that we are producing that with more than, or close to 90% of renewables or recovered heat.
Yes.
And we are also really proud that we have signed a contract with DigiPlex, so we can reuse your heat from DigiPlex data center here in Stockholm.
Yes, I visited your combined heat and power plant yesterday, and we heard the idea of optimizing parameters, and the parameters that have to be optimized within the Stockholm energy grid are just astonishing. So we might hear a bit more about that possibly. Okay, and next along.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. I'm Kristian Gyland. I'm the CEO of Green Mountain Data Center. We're operating 2 data centers in Norway, one of the west coast of Norway in Stavanger region, and one close to Oslo in Telemark. We've been in operation with those data centers for almost 5 years, and have a huge potential in our 2 sites to grow and follow the trends which is in the market now, that the Nordics are a popular site due to the cold climate we have, and the surplus of power, and also having the sustainability of the power.
Right. Okay. And Fabien from Google. Part of your job is...
Haven't changed.
Yes. I noticed the word location in your talk. So, I mean, that will come in later. Shall we start with Stockholm, though? And I know that DigiPlex has got some news announced yesterday. We might start talk about that. What's exciting about DigiPlex?
That's a good question. A lot. And I think we are in the right industry at the right time. And it's very interesting to see how closely we are working now with partners. And so it's really a whole ecosystem that's coming together. And of course, when you look into the thing that Fabien showed about the sustainability and the challenges we have in the world, we believe that the data center has a huge potential to improve. We have to use renewable energy. We have to use solutions like the heat reuse. We have to get this down. 2% of all CO2 emission in the world is coming from data centers. And when everybody knows that the usage of data, big data, artificial intelligence is just going like this, we will see an extremely growth in data center capacity. In 2016, the data center industry consumed 416 terawatt of electricity. That is the same as the whole United Kingdom is using in 1 year. And when we know that this is just growing like this, it is a key element that we as an industry is coming together. And that's why we, both the way we are deploying the technology by having a very, very cost-effective and low PUE, as Fabien was looking into, as well as having the reuse, then we get into extremely good proposition for the future.
Good. You did that very well. You didn't get cut off in the process.
Ah, no. I'm experienced.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I was looking at our agenda on the web, and one of the questions was about net zero data centers and data centers that contribute energy. And in a small way, you're doing that. I mean, first of all, I think we can probably say data centers will never actually be a net producer of energy unless you have some sort of local generation. But yesterday, DigiPlex announced a data center hooked up to the district heating system here, which I thought that's not news because you've already got 30 data centers on the system. What's new about that, and how significant is it?
For us, it's the first initiative really going live here in Sweden. We're doing the same process in Norway at the moment. But it is, of course, important that when you consume electricity, 100% renewable energy, and then you produce on-site 100% renewable energy, then basically that should net it out. And that is the clear ambition we have in DigiPlex, is to get that balance, and that's why we're working with our partners to achieve that. But it is a lot of innovation in this, both from having extremely effective air-to-air solutions in the data center, but also, of course, partner up with Anders and his team. Right.
Okay. I mean, and data centers contributing their waste heat. when you see the context of the whole city, it's a tiny proportion. Even if your data center can produce enough heat for 10,000 apartments, but they're modern apartments and they don't need much heat, and that's like 1%, isn't it? Anders, talk to me about why you actually want data center heat.
I think our target is maybe not only to supply energy to consumers in the region of Stockholm, it's also to make Stockholm even more sustainable than it is today. And in order to make the whole city sustainable, we need to look much broader into different alternatives and adapt them together and see how we can reuse heat, which are otherwise spoiled or not just waste. We need to see how we can actually connect centralized large-scale production with small-scale decentralized heat reuse.
Yes.
And we need to combine all these kind of different solutions, and that's what we have been aiming from since 2012 when we established the open district heating trademark, which we are, I think we are still the only one in the world who has opened up the net in that sense, where we can trade with heat, excess heat from different customers in the city, which makes it possible to reuse heat which otherwise would be lost. And that contribution is one part of making the whole Stockholm sustainable. I don't think that there are only one solution to make a whole city sustainable, and that's what we have identified, and that's the reason why we are combining that kind of large-scale biomass-powered CHP, which producing the whole electricity for the whole vehicle fleet in Stockholm, and still try to find heat reuse from small data centers and large data centers.
Yes, I mean, the interesting thing is the combined heat and power produces the kind of heat you really want, but the data center can provide just a bit, and it helps, it makes a significant percentage. And because you've got the pipes in place already for your district heating system, it's not that much of an expense to add it to it.
No, I think that we are in a very unique position in Sweden and in the Nordic countries. We have an infrastructure for energy which are amazing. We have the infrastructure of electricity, which I can say is one of the world's best. We have an infrastructure of heat recovery and district heating pipe and cooling pipe, which are the best in the world. And that gives us advantages of actually connecting different kinds of energy resources and actually make the whole city sustainable. And I received a couple of days ago from Houston the large energy conference there, and I can see that if we can show the rest of the world how unique these concepts are, I think there will be more investments done in the district heating sector also throughout the world, because it gives you so many advantages to utilize energy otherwise lost.
Yes. Unfortunately, most other places in the world are about 50 years behind in the construction of pipes. So, Tor, I mean, even though you're in Scandinavia, in the Nordic region, where you are, there's not that much opportunity for heat reuse.
When you're building a data center, the site selection is really, let's say, challenging and important thing. There is a lot of elements that has to fit for your site. First of all, you have to have access to the right amount of power. You have to have access to a site. If you look at the power, the way the power is distributed, if your data center is located far away from where the power is produced, you have a lot of transfer losses in the power grid as well. So let's say what we've done with the Telemark site is that we have located that really close to where the power is produced. We have about a 200 megawatt produced like 1,000 meters from the site.
Yes.
And building fiber connectivity isn't that difficult. It's more challenging to transport the power. We're still really close to where the data is consumed. From our data center, we got 6.5 milliseconds going to London. So still being able to produce in an area where there is a surplus of power, where we have huge space available. We're not in a major city, so regulation is not that challenging. The cost of labor is not that challenging. So our focus on the site selection has been move a little bit out of the big cities, use what is the other advantages of being in a city. When it comes to reuse of our heat, we don't have the advantage of having a lot of people, a lot of businesses nearby our data center to actually reuse our heat. So We have investigated in different projects to see how we could get an advantage of that. And what we're currently doing in our Telemark data center is cooperating with a company planning to build a fish farm. So where we use the heat from the data center to heat the water where the fish is being produced. So we are more seeking different alternatives, and we participate a lot in let's say the educational part of Norway. We do guest lectures on the university, and we are challenging them to get innovative in way to reuse that heat, because we are producing a lot of heat, and just wasting it isn't a good way when we're seeing that the amount of power used by our business is growing. We have to take our responsibility to try to get a way of using that energy which currently is wasted.
Yes, I mean, the marvellous complexity of the parameters, that there might be some fish that could use a bit more extra warmth, or even the cold water that comes down from the mountain when you turn on the hydroelectric power can affect the environment in the lakes, so give them a bit of data center warmth.
One interesting thing on our Telemark data center is there is several hydro power stations just nearby the data center, and they're collecting water from high up in the mountains, where the water in the lakes are really cold. So after they started with the power production, all the fish vanished from the river because the river is too cold for fish to live in. So when we were doing the project of extracting hot water into the river, we were actually they really wanted us to do that because they wanted to have like the normal climate back in the river. So you can see there's a lot of different elements in our business how we can do.
And before it disappears from my mind, perhaps later, I wonder if somebody could work out the energy saved by locating close to the generators, to say the energy you save by not having transmission losses. My guess is that might be an order of magnitude roughly the same as the energy you could possibly get back from reusing heat anyway. You may have saved that already before you start. Which, Fabien, you've put data centers everywhere, and I think, is it always a good idea to go to the places where there is already renewable energy?
I see where you're going already.
Yeah, it's an easy one for you.
No, it's so first you're asking me my recipe here, so I won't share my recipe fully.
Yes.
No, site selection is a very interesting field, and it's plenty of criteria and parameters to assess, and it's a world of compromises. And while I see the benefits of being very central, just to the cities for district heating, for instance, in the Nordics when it exists, because it doesn't exist everywhere, but also for just the labor force, just sometimes easier to be close to cities. Sometimes, the production of energy is, just found, or, the big areas we need for data center is found elsewhere in the middle of nowhere. So it's finding the right compromise here. After, just to answer your question, I think the point I was making when we were preparing the call, the panel, is I like to take that example of comparing Norway and let's say Poland. I have nothing against Poland, but let's take Poland, just for that example. Just say Poland is fairly not much renewable, just those days. I guess things are improving anyway. While Norway is something like 98.5% renewable energy. And the logic would be, just Google, your next data center, go to Norway, makes sense. But when we have the policy I've just explained of, compensating any electron used in the grid by reinserting, a renewable electron in the grid. When people tell me you can't go to Poland, my answer is maybe it's the right thing to do, because if you go to Poland, just with the right mechanism, with the right support, investing in parallel in, power price agreements for wind farms and solar farms, etc., you're having a bigger impact maybe than if you do the same in Norway, which doesn't really need our support. Yeah, I'm sure there are deals we can just help with, but just others will, and Norway by itself is showing the momentum. So I like taking that example. It doesn't mean I won't go to Norway. It doesn't mean I will go to Poland, but I like making this parallel because it depends how you go, not only where you go.
Okay, Tor?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought because what your goal is to increase the amount of renewables in the market. But if you look at the complexity of the power market today, if you were mentioning Norway, and as I'm from Norway, we know the market quite good. Norway is currently producing 120% of what it's consuming. We have a surplus of 20%. What we're doing with that power today is that we're exporting it to the rest of Europe. We're building sea cables. Those are, if you're transporting power over long distance, you have to use direct current, your rectifier and derectifiers on both ends. That's a huge loss in the power transmission by doing that. So instead, and also when you're incentive or creating incentives with country to increase the amount of renewables in the market, Norway has a unique position because the reason for us not producing more today is that we don't have any consumers in the market using more than we produce today. So if you bring up the consumption within Norway, you're able to increase the production in Norway and actually move the load from rest of Europe and increase the amount of renewable in Norway, in Europe, not only Norway, because we're in a European power market today. And as well as with the Paris Agreement, Norway has agreed to increase the amount of renewables produced. But we're still at 100%, but we have agreed to increase it to assist the European initiative to be more sustainable.
And I can't disagree with you in that. I'm just saying, it's a world of parameters, and your parameter is the one to consider also. Same as business parameters, where just if I'm in the north of Norway, serving a customer in Portugal, maybe just two latencies, just problematic for me to be able to reach that. So it's a world of parameters, but all of those are to be considered, and your point is totally valid.
So. Some places need help using up all their renewable power. Okay. So, Anders, you were going to say something.
Yes, this discussion is really interesting. I think that it's, of course, I can give both Fabien and you're correct that we are going into a European market regarding power sector, and I'm really happy for that because we need to have transmission from the Nordic countries down to the European countries. And in the end, most hopefully we have much more renewables in the whole rest of Europe as well, and that means that we also can actually have transmission from southern Europe to northern Europe also in the future. So I think what Fabien is emphasizing is actually that the trend of building a lot of more new data centers in the world and the trend of utilizing more and more energy throughout the whole world means that we need to create additional green electricity capacity. It's not enough with what we have today. And that means that we need to be smarter. We need to find solutions which are more resource efficient. We need to utilize also investment in green power, which Google, for instance, is doing. And we also need to reuse the heat where we can. But we can't do it everywhere, and what you are telling us about in Telemark is a splendid solutions. We can find more and more solutions where we can utilize more of the energy which are put into a data center. And for me, that's an innovation stage which we haven't started yet at all. And I can see in front of me that we are actually adapting other sectors to data center sectors and creating more business opportunities for other sectors as a consequence of utilizing that energy, which actually are there and always will be there and will be just appear in another form.
Yeah, I think it's also. I think we will move a little bit into edge and the impact of edge, because then we're talking about where are all of these data center they have to be very close to the end users, and as with artificial intelligence, with robotization, with everything happening now, today's 8 billion connected devices, in 2 years, 20 billion. Also, that means that you have to move the data centers close to where the people living. Because if you have a driverless car, then you have a problem, because there is a limitation in speed of light. So when you do a compute, you can't move it there and back, because then the car
It hit a lamppost.
It hits somewhere there. And that means that there is a big change in how, that's why also this heat-to use is so important, because these data centers will be deployed very, very close. So the big question is really, will the edge eat the cloud? So this is a very interesting discussions, but I think the deployment of data centers will be closer and closer to where people also are living because of the latency, but also, of course, then we have the electricity as a part of the whole equation. But it's a very interesting scenario coming up for us in the industry.
I'm glad you mentioned edge, because it's something that DCD has been having some summit days on, and it is a very interesting thing, especially as, you know, first thing is the three things that are supposed to be driving it: 5G, the Internet of Things, and whatever the third one was, machine learning probably, and needing things locally. They're all things which are driverless cars haven't happened yet. 5G hasn't happened yet. The Internet of Things hasn't really happened yet, but we know they will. We're not quite sure how they will, so we don't know quite what the edge will be. And the other thing is, if it's more determined by a fast response, some edge applications may only need a 6.5 millisecond response. So your edge resource could actually be in Terramark for an edge application in London, if it really only needs that response time. Some things need a faster response time, like driverless cars, so they can change direction before they hit something. I wondered another thought about the fact that when Fabien was talking about Google, I kind of thought, is he actually privileged in the fact that he's got a large monolithic single company application that's global, that has good margins, so he can afford to do this? I mean, for Gisle and Tor, are your margins lower in the co-location space? Do you wish you had that freedom?
When we are out in the market, we're able to compete on pricing and still being renewable. So what we also really focusing is the flexibility to follow the market, time to market. What's happening today, that the growth is enormous, and we have customer challenging us. We have to have something up and running within half a year. So what we've done a lot with other two elements, the cost of the solution, also the flexibility, being able to deliver what's needed in a short amount of time, and be able to build on specification based upon the customer.
Okay.
So the way I look at this is that when you look at Google or some of the other hyperscalers, when they deploy hundreds of megawatt, that's not where the colo players are. But basically what I see is that we as colo players is a important part of their deployment, back to the edge deployment. So that's a very interesting question, but there is of course a very close deployment strategy in this.
Yes. Okay, I'm aware that, having said how interesting you are as an audience, I've now just been ignoring you. So we've got another 20 minutes or so of this panel, so if there are any questions you might want to come up with, I perhaps should have given you some more warning of that. Does anybody have any questions? There's a hand up over there, and there's possibly a microphone near you, or I can come over with this one. Right, I've got the roving mic.
Hi, I'm Penny Jones from 451 Research. I have a question for Google. As you're looking at data center sites, obviously you're using third-party sites as well as your own sites. How do you then consider renewable energy as part of your site selection when you're leveraging co-location?
Yes.
It's a good question. We do to some extent, to be honest. I think we don't do it enough. So first of all, I think the industry recognizes the importance of renewable energy and green energy. So rare are the providers those days that can't have just a story around green energy. The first ask I make is really just to be able, and even in our contract, to be able to source green energy directly. It's sometimes it comes with a cost, because if you're just a third of a co-location, and you ask for green energy, sometimes you have to switch the whole data center facility or campus to green energy, which may have a cost for other just customers in this facility. So in those instances, when I ask for the right, I'm also agreeing to pay the other cost, just for the rest of the customers. So that's one thing. When it starts to be bigger, we basically ask for the right to appoint the energy provider directly, so we could just work on that. But that sounds good and almost great. The reality is that I think there is still just a lot of things to do, and I'm not I still have to work on exactly where I want the colocation providers to be. So what I want to ask them. So work in progress.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yes. So, I mean, when you're dealing with a wholesale co-location provider, you can't demand they suddenly have renewable energy on the grid they happen to be on, because there's a third party, there's governments and everything else involved. It gets complicated. Exactly.
So, those days, just it's a small percentage of our fleet. So, mm-hmm. It's not going down. So, just work in progress. Mm-hmm. Right. Any other thoughts from the panel on that? We've still got plenty of time left. I want to ask all of you what messages someone can bring away from this who isn't based in Sweden. A more optimistic message than spend 50 years building some heat pipes. Where should we start? Should we start from this end?
I think that the takeaway is that this region, what we call the Nordic region, is a very, very good place to be running data centers from. Of course, the cost of power, renewable energy, and everything we have discussed today. And I think that when you see what's happened over the last few years, mm-hmm. you will see really that there's also a very growing industry. So what people should see is that there is a lot of interest, and there's a lot of investments being done in the area, both in skills, in plants and everything. So there is really a strong movement, and I would recommend that people that really would like to dig into this is reading Boston Consulting Group's report from June 2016, basically planning the next 8-10 years in Sweden. Very, very impressive plans, and I'm sure after 1 year they're following it. So Sweden is following all the investments, all the outcome that predicted in that report, and I think it's a very interesting reading material, a good learning curve for people really to understand what's going on in the region.
Right. So when we go back to our countries, do we actually have to sort of change the country, make the government change its policies, or can we do something in our own data centers?
Now, what's happened now is that both Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland also, they're really, from a governmental point of view, they're putting everything in place for us operators and for the large hyperscalers to come to this region. Mm-hmm. And we are working very closely as a team across also countries. So I think it's a very, very, very positive push at the moment. And we can also see some tangible results of it.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts, Anders, on things we could take away?
Yeah, but I think one takeaway is actually that if I look ahead of our present time, I think that cities and companies will have more impact on the environment than nations. Mm-hmm. And why I'm saying that is that if you look about cities, you can look about London, it's the same population that we have in whole Sweden and Norway together. Mm-hmm. And if you look at other large cities in the world, in California, they have decided they will be green.
Yes.
They will go for the carbon in capture, and they will mitigate the climate change. And there are companies, large international companies, which like Google and like other large players in other industries, they have also decided they are tackling the climate change, and they are willing to do an extra effort to actually help the next generation. And my takeaway is actually, after being in the energy conference in United States, which was not that optimistic actually, that cities and companies are the driver towards a more climate-friendly environment and also a carbon-free environment. And there are a huge, huge strength when companies and cities goes together and try to mitigate the climate change. And I can see what's happening here in Stockholm. The decision in Stockholm to be fossil-free by 2040, the decision it had made us to be fossil-free more or less 2030, that is a driver towards new solutions, new innovation, and actually, hopefully, a world which is sustainable also to our grandchildren.
Right, and it would be businesses that would help the cities to evolve their strategies.
I would put it this way: there are no business without a climate.
Yes.
With a good climate, there are no businesses, so that's not an alternative.
Yes.
And I think also what will be discussing during this day, which I'm extremely interested of listening about, is that the digitalization which we are in the middle of, in the starting point maybe of,
Yes.
can create tremendous opportunities to actually reuse and combine different sectors with new solutions, which we haven't imagined yet.
Right.
And that's also a positive thing which I take away.
So individuals are too small, companies and cities are the right size, governments and nations change too slowly. And you might get competition between different cities within one country. Yes.
When we're sitting here and talking, and we've done that for several years, we're talking a lot about the cost of power in the Nordics and the sustainability part of Norway. But it is important to also address a little bit about all the other advantages within the Nordics. I'm from the Stavanger region of Norway, which is the oil capital of Norway, and going back 4 or 5 years, we had quite a large reduction in the oil price. It was not good for the ones involved in that area, but it actually opened up a lot of possibilities from our point of view, because there is a lot of knowledge within that business to be innovative in how to operate infrastructure, how to automate things. It's really the cost of sending people out on the oil platforms are really high compared to operating the oil platform onshore. So what we did with a lot of those engineers and people, we tried to adapt the same technology within our data center, using analytics to improve the operation of the data center, having fully automated data center, using innovative cooling technology to be even more efficient. So the type of competence and knowledge within the Nordics in doing industrial solution is quite high. We're also working quite a lot with a lot of educational providers to educate more people within our business. There is one speaker later on from ICT Telemark who will talk about an initiative we've done. The whole business, Gisle and me, and the whole business has developed a study for people which we will employ when they're fully educated. So we're doing a lot of other things in the Nordics, Norway, except from being cheap and sustainable.
So skills and knowledge should be spread, and
it's very
one
important.
of the things we should all take home from here, if we're not from Sweden or the Nordics, one of the things we should take home perhaps is a Swede or a Norwegian.
Bring it home.
Okay, and Fabien, things that, I mean, actually, one thing about you as a cloud provider, one of the things we could all do to reduce the energy in our data centers would be just to move it all to the cloud as quick as we possibly could. That's one thing that might be said.
I mean, the different studies are fairly clear about it. I think just the latest numbers I've seen with 85 to 90% energy saving if just everybody was moving just to the cloud for efficiency reasons, because just what we're transferring is not only from a just a 5 years old data center to a brand new data center just with a lot of efficiency, because just with the volume and the leadership we have, but often we're moving from some servers in the basement of an old facility, just even, let me dare saying, late 90s types of servers, just which are very inefficient because they're not run, just at any, good rating. So there is enormous saving. So definitely, just it's for the planet. This move is a good one.
Not necessarily your cloud, but any cloud.
I mean, any cloud, of course, just. But don't ask me to be neutral neither. So whatever I'm going to say, you can't take it. I'd like to answer the question before. So I know I'm not, just from the Nordics. So just my takeaway may not be the same. But I think we talk renewable energy. We talk, just what strikes. Several things I want to highlight. First, I think just if I have one takeaway, I guess. He's not looking, but just Thomas could be one takeaway, just who is, promoting, just his country fairly well. So at one point also, it's not only what you have, is how you promote it. So that's one takeaway. I think, just the power infrastructure, just in the Nordics is extremely, extremely strong. We forget about it because it's a given, but, just don't forget this is an asset. And I'm, I've said, and I will repeat, and it's important to show a way to renewable energy, which is economical, but it may be just complex in some situations. And what strikes me here is in Stockholm, or just with the people here, is that there is more. There is a belief in sustainability more than just oh yeah, it makes sense. There is a belief, and I think that's the biggest takeaway maybe.
Okay, I'm seeing 2 questions from the audience, possibly more, but I'm going to do that thing where you gather both questions and then ask for answers.
I see a group of a lot of large-scale development, but there's also a lot of smaller-scale development out there too. I mean, kind of for Anders, are there any initiatives out there for the cost of that energy to be down a little bit for some of our smaller-scale operators? I'm from the States, but I work here in Stockholm.
Great, thanks very much. And the other question we have, that's about small-scale providers, small-scale businesses.
Hi, David Davis from Arup. I have a question around the district heating networks and their reliability and their uptime, and also from a colo provider's perspective, would you ever see a time when you can fully rely on the district heating to take your heat away, or are you always going to have that 100% backup demand? I appreciate it's a bit different summer and winter, but is there ever what's the progression there in the future?
Okay, that's a very good data center angle to this. How reliable is it? We'll start with that and then come to the small operators. How reliable is data center heating? Can we trust it? District heating. District cooling even.
I think if you take it from the perspective how reliable it is district heating, then it's very, very, very reliable. And then it's talking about how long period during the year can you do the heat reuse. That depends, of course, of how large the system is. And if you connect a small data center to a large district heating system, like in Stockholm, you more or less can reuse heat more or less the whole year. If you connect it to a smaller district heating grid, then of course you will most likely have problems during maybe summer periods where it's not enough. It's enough with the heat already in the district heating system. But I think what we are aiming for here is to see, can we find solutions where there are alternative use for the excess heat from the data center also during periods where there might be other energy resources which are more competitive or much more cheaper than the heat from a data center. And what we can see is that we are struggling with seeing, is there possibilities to storage in a district heating system? There might be. Is there also possibility to use it in other sectors which I mentioned? And we can see that as well. But should I be really humble and say that heat reuse needs also a quite significant large district heating system. So that makes Stockholm's district heating system much more reliable than most of the district heating system in the world. And this district cooling system in Stockholm is also the second largest in the world, and that also means that the reliability of that district cooling system is not comparable with a small-scale district cooling or district heating system. It's much, much higher.
What's the first one?
Sorry?
Small.
What's the first one?
Yes, what was the first question? I was following on from that one. I was just going to say, outside Stockholm, I guess your heat reuse is liable to be with a small organisation of some sort, so it'll be down to case by case. And the first question was about small organisations. There we are. That was a mistake getting two at once, wasn't it? Do you want to say it again?
Just the economic standpoint of getting the energy to a smaller facility.
Okay.
Are there some initiatives to help out the smaller business person, the smaller data centers?
If you look at here in Stockholm, we have very small data centers connected to the district heating net. So it's not a question about size. From that perspective, it's actually easier to connect a small data center to the district heating system in Stockholm, because the small amount of heat a small data center produces, we can easily use the whole year around. So from that perspective, it's easier to actually promote a small-scale data center than a large-scale 100 megawatt Google center, because that demands a huge district heating system and a huge heat usage to actually be able to set up.
Okay.
Was that the development cost of the district heating system, or I mean, setting up a small district heating system? Actually, if you look in a suburban area or in a city which are growing, and you start to connect a couple of real estate buildings which are under constructions, then it's not that expensive to build. But if you go into an existing city where you don't have the infrastructure, then it's tremendous costly. So what I also think is the possibility outside Stockholm and the Nordic countries, that when you are expanding the cities in the United States, for instance, you connect a couple of different real estate buildings which have different kinds of, it can be commercial buildings, it can be office buildings, and it can also be a data center. If you connect 3 or 4 of those, you can actually find a really cost-efficient solution utilizing the excess heat from the data center to the other buildings.
Okay, Tor.
So you need to look at it from a specific perspective.
I think what is important is that we as a business has to actually address all the knowledge within not only here but the rest of the knowledge, that we have a huge amount of energy. Is there anyone that has an idea on how to reuse it? And it has also, it's not only that we have energy and let's build something and reuse it, because you have to invest quite heavily in order to actually reuse that. We did a project on our first data center where we were thinking about reusing the heat to heat up our generators. Generator has to be at 45-50 degrees at all time. When I got a project cost for the investment of that project, it wasn't doable because the power in the region is too cheap. Mm-hmm. So investing quite heavily into a project to reuse the heat, it wasn't doable. So
you may find that reusing heat isn't even economically viable in your own facility in a very specific application that needs heat.
But we need innovation.
Yes.
To be able to reuse the energy we have. So what we're doing, we're addressing all the different players, and is there something? Fish farming is one good idea. It could operate next to the data center. It needs heat for the production. So that's one good element.
Right.
Everything has to be based on a business case, as in everything. So.
Exactly. Right. I think Tor as a point, it may be difficult to admit, but I've studied projects which looked good on paper, but just the carbon footprint of, just connecting the pipes for kilometers and kilometers, where it was just not, smart to do it. Even if good on paper of reuse, but you need to look at that. So what I'm committing myself, I commit to look at renewable, just reuse of heat. Commit at looking at searching, just finding, just studying the solutions. Some cases, just you don't find one, just initially, and eventually you can attract a fish farm or, agricultural, developments, etc. But at least we should, just commit to looking at reuse for sure.
Okay. I think we're out of time with so many dangling questions. Is it still 2% or is that an old estimate of the amount of energy? Can moving to the cloud completely remove our, can it enable us to carry on growing the way we are without growing the power requirements? And distributing the data centers to where they are needed. Could we take that to the ultimate level of distributing them to our homes where we can use the heat directly? I know of 3 or 4 companies around the world that are trying that. So there's so many possibilities. Many of these will be discussed in the sessions later today. And if they aren't, feel free to bring it up and follow up with us in future events. I think you all deserve a coffee. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for the panel, a super group of Scandinavian data center providers. Thank you very much.
Bra, tack.